Hello. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into the essay on the TSI, also known as the right placer. If you're looking for a video that does more of an overview to explain what the TSI is about, we do also have one of those in the Canvas course, so check that out. This is who I am. I teach at the San Antonio Independent School District at Thomas Jefferson High School. There's my email if you want to reach out and ask me any questions. So to about the essay portion, some of this I have gone over, but I think it bears repeating. The essay's typed. I always want to make sure students understand that they're taking this on the computer. And I guess one of the outcomes of the pandemic is the students are getting more comfortable on the computer, which is always good when you're being asked to take computer-based assessments. Remember, the essay is either going to occur after the 30 CRC questions or after the diagnostic questions. So I like to tell students that they may encounter it when they may encounter it in the test. If they do very poorly on both the CRC questions and the diagnostic questions, they're not even going to get to write the essay. And we do see that sometimes when the scores come through. The scores range from a low of a 1 to a high of an 8. You do need a 5 or higher to pass, or if you're used to the old TSI scoring, you're like, well, they can get a 4. If they're writing multiple choice, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they do on the CRC questions. If they don't get a 5 on the essay, they're not considered college ready, and they're going to need to retake the whole test. So that part of it's kind of a bummer. I also, this is my own personal theory. I have nothing but anecdotal evidence to support this, but I think it's become harder to pass the essay. We didn't really have a hard time passing it when I worked over at Harlandale, and I don't think the kids were tremendously more skilled than the students that I'm working with now. So I think it's become harder. I don't know if I'm just telling myself that to feel better about the fact that I'm having a hard time getting some of the kids through the essay portion. But it's something that I'm definitely going to, as I prepare students for TSI, something I'm going to need to spend a little bit more time on. I always like to tell the students that they're probably going to get their score that day. There has been hand scoring in the past. I don't know if that's still happening under the new TSI. I haven't seen it yet, but we've only had maybe a couple rounds of kids test the 2.0. All right, so I always recommend the students push to the upper limit. It says 300 to 600. You know, if you tell a student they only have to write 300, that's all they're going to do. I used to tell students to write more than 600. I'm revisiting that advice given the fact that I've been having a hard time getting students to pass this one. But I still think when I look at the samples that the better ones are up closer to 600. I think going over 600 is still not a problem, but I don't like that the directions say between 300 and 600 because I don't really think it's possible to pass if you just write 300 words, unless I guess they're spectacular. But I do think this is one case where longer is better, which is of course something we have to retrain the students for because they're used to cutting their ideas for the STAR test. So it's, there's a little lack of flexibility. There's a little flexibility the students have to show when it comes to testing. They have to know when to make it shorter, when to make it longer. The essay is written in response to a prompt. Fortunately, I find it pretty similar to STAR 2, so I can use that as a reference point with the students. The prompt is designed to be written without specific knowledge in the area. Same as the STAR prompt. You're not going to ask you about climate change or something that you need to have specific knowledge of, although you could incorporate those examples. It's a very open-ended topic. The essay is thesis-based and should be organized according to a specific beginning, middle, and end. The directions do specify multi-paragraphed, so I don't recommend one long paragraph to the students ever, but I usually say between 4 to 7 paragraphs. So I don't know, a lot of people, it's kind of controversial still to teach the 5-paragraph essay. It's seen as a bit of a stigma and it's seen as too formulaic. I think on the TSA, we don't have to worry about those things as much, but I think having a specific beginning and an end, and then the middle can be, you can vary the number of paragraphs you have. You can have 3, you can have 2, you can have 4. That's usually where you can grow your paper. But I think having a very specific beginning, middle, and end structure is probably going to work very well in the TSI. All right, so these are the different areas that they score. This is coming from the testing manual. This is not something that I put together. This is a screenshot from the testing manual. And these are the areas that they score them on. And from what I can tell, looking at the scoring manual, each of these gets a score of 3, up to 3. So 1, 2, or 3. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the difference between a 4 and a 5 because that's a little bit unclear. But what I tell the students, what does all of this mean? Um, and so basically, what does it mean to have purpose and focus? I always say that manifests in the essay and having a clear thesis that address the prompt. That's the thing. And I even try to tell the students to use some words in the prompt and to sort of maybe pepper those words throughout the essay so that they can, again, since it's being graded by a computer, it's an algorithm. I think that that's a way to sort of like satisfy that requirement. Organization and structure, development and support is mainly going to happen in the body of the essay, and that's what I tell the students. That's where you're going to get your points for those particular categories. And then the other things where you're talking about sentence variety and style, mechanical conventions, those are throughout. That means you try to write well and not have a lot of mistakes. And I think that is something that our students in this district struggle with, is just having this sort of polished writing that maybe we learned as English teachers how to develop. The students don't always have that polish. So that's something that we can kind of encourage throughout all of our English classes. But I think it is maybe a little bit more important on TSI. I think maybe that's graded with a little bit more emphasis than perhaps it is on STAR. Again, I'm going off of anecdotal evidence there. Critical thinking, that's having interesting perspectives, interesting examples. I'm unclear on how the computer checks for that, but maybe there's something magic in the algorithm there as well. But they do, if you look at the essay guides, which I'll reference the essay guides at the end, if you do look at them, you'll notice that in the scoring of the samples, they give each of those categories up to 3 points. But there is a little problem with that, and I'll talk about that later in the video. So this is an example. This comes from the 2018 guide that was released. As far as I know, we haven't received a new guide. I think the essays remain pretty much the same in TSI 2.0. If that changes, we will definitely update you and definitely update the course. But this to me really looks very similar to a STAR prompt. If you're used to STAR 2, if you're used to the second STAR, the persuasive prompt, very similar setup, which is good for our students because they've had that practice. You get that passage that's sort of like getting the reader in the correct mindset, like getting the student thinking about the topic. And then you have the assignment, which again, if you're like me, you probably tell your students, don't worry too much about that opening passage because it's just intended to stimulate your thoughts. If you don't have to refer to this quotation in your essay, you don't have to understand what it's saying. This is really the question you're responding to. Once again, with these word counts, I try to get the kids up closer to 600. I just think they have a much better shot of passing if they write more, because it's going to force them to develop their examples. Obviously you can write more and not do well, but if we can encourage them to develop those examples a lot more, that's going to help them with their writing. And I'll talk a little bit more about the scoring later in the video. So the first thing I usually talk to students about is how to extract the thesis from the prompt. And then I always talk to them about taking some of the words from the prompt and actually putting them in your thesis. I think this is really good advice for struggling writers, because honestly, if you're working, some people would say, well, that's not very creative. Most of the students that are taking this TSI and are taking it multiple times are struggling writers. So it's okay if they're a little safer and they're a little, and in my mind, you may think of it differently, but I think it's okay for them to do some of these things that are not as creative or not as outside of the box. We just really want them to pass the test, and we really want to make it easy for them. The only person that's going to read this essay is a computer, and really who cares? As long as they pass the test, that's really all I care about, and probably all you care about as well if you're watching this video and trying to help these kids get through this test. So this is the essay prompt. So when I pull a thesis from it, we are absolutely in charge of our own destiny and are free to make our own decisions. That's one possible way to answer it. Unfortunately, due to various circumstances, we were often limited in the choices that we make. Those are obviously taking the two opposite ends of it. I'm sure there's room for a more qualified middle-of-the-road thesis, and if you feel like you have a student who would do well with that, that's fine. Again, sometimes I'm dealing with students who just kind of want a little bit of an easier way to get through the test. I personally feel like the second thesis is easier to develop. So I usually, when I'm doing this with students, when I'm helping them, when I'm demonstrating for them, I always pick the second one, and you'll see that reflected in the following slides. By the way, if you like this slideshow and you think this is something you could use with your students, it is going to be in the Canvas course. You can make a copy of it, and then you can change it, put your own spin on it. And just with the promise that if you do something really cool, please let me know so I can copy you, because that's what teaching is copying all the right people. So what I typically do with a student is I take them through how to get an introduction done, and this is a very basic introduction. So we talk about the different ways, and I know that you guys have probably done this quite a bit with students. If you're getting them ready for the STAR, or you're getting them ready even for the AP, some of our students need some of those easy things to hook onto. And so I give them a couple of different options. Perhaps you have some other tried and true options that you want to add into this. So I like starting with, I did the third one. I started with a truism, and you can take that truism and either agree with it or challenge it. I have to tell the students what a truism is, because they don't typically know, but I give them a couple of examples and they'll say, oh yeah, that, my coach uses a lot of those, or my dad says stuff like that all the time. We often hear that as Americans, that we can do or be anything that we want, that the only thing holding us back is our own mind. So for me, I like to tell the students to put the issue out there in a way, like introduce the issue without bringing in your thesis. So that truism is one that as a writer, I'm going to challenge if this were to be my essay. While that is a nice idea, I'm challenging it, right? The truth is more complicated. There are so many things that can control what we can and cannot do. And then the thesis is a little cut off at the bottom. I apologize. Can I get it to be a little, yeah, there we go. Unfortunately, due to various circumstances, we're often limited in the choices that we make. Is that the most exciting introduction in the world? No. But it's a pattern, it's a path through. If you have ways of getting a more interesting introduction, please share them with me, because I am always looking for good ideas. See, I'm just making this video to solicit more ideas from other people. So then when you develop the body, this is where I think most of your score comes in. I think that that's true whether you're taking the AP, the STAR, or the TSI. Having those examples, and that's something that I think our students can struggle with. You'll see some of the things that I use are probably things that you're already using. But what I like to do is I like to sort of, when I'm brainstorming with them, I like to start with what I call the bigger ideas. It's like, okay, what are some reasons you think, or what are some things that can limit us? So, I might sit down with them. And now here I made the list for you because it's a video and I'm trying to keep it shorter if I can. But what I might do if I had an intervention session is I might say, what are some of the things that keep us from making our decisions? And I might do if you're doing it on Zoom, you might bring up the whiteboard off of Zoom and take notes, and then you can always save that if you want to. If you're in a classroom, remember those days, you can have them use chart paper or do it on the whiteboard or a chalkboard if you still have a chalkboard like I do. If you're in one of the older buildings, you just come up with lists. I usually let the students, say a bunch of different stuff, and then I'll add a few things in there. And so these are what I call the bigger ideas. These are not examples yet. These are broader ideas. Then to get those more specific examples, I use CHELPs or chores. Now I learned CHELPs first, and then through my work with AP, I've been teaching AP language and composition for the last 2 years, a little baby AP teacher. I learned about chores, which is kind of the same thing. I mean, if you compare the two of them side by side, it's the same. It's just, it's just different letters. So I always say to the students, whichever one you like better, use it. It doesn't matter. I also tell the students that you don't have to have an example for every letter. Sometimes as a class activity, I'll do that. I'll say, think of an example for every single letter. But I always tell them when they get into the test, even if they pick 2 or 3 of those letters. But the reason I think this is a good brainstorming strategy, and the reason that I've used it for a number of years, is because where most people start when they get a topic like that is from their own experience. And writing from your own experience, as you know, as English teachers, can be very powerful. That said, what if you don't really have an experience that perfectly aligns with a topic and you're sitting there like, crap, what am I going to write about? This encourages students to think outside their own experience, which is where we all start when we start. We may, like as teachers, as people that are a lot more experienced and educated than the students, we may think of historical examples or current events examples like off the fly. But a lot of us do start from like, oh, how does this affect me personally? That's where we tend to start. It's just how people's minds operate. There's nothing wrong with it. And so we talk about incorporating, and what I try to do with students is I try to say, go from your place of strength. What do you know a lot about? What are you good at? If you're good at history, what kind of historical examples can you pull in? If you're a sports person, what sports examples can you pull in? And the first time I used this with a student, it was for Star Prep. I'm going to go back. I think it was the one, is it better to play it safe or to take a risk? It was that one we were looking as a practice, because I can't think of any examples. And I said, well, what about sports? Because I knew the student really well, and I knew he was a big Dallas Cowboys fan, and he was also, into the basketball. He was always watching the basketball games. And suddenly when I just said that one word, he had 4 or 5 examples that he could write about. So to me, the brilliance of this, or the utility of this, is getting them to think outside of their own experience and getting them to hone in on a couple of things that they really know a lot about, and showing them they do have areas where they're experts and that they can bring those examples in, and then they're able to elaborate on them. Sometimes students will say, I'll say, an example from history, and they'll say, well, Martin Luther King, they seem to use that for everything. But they don't really know anything about Martin Luther King other than he's a really good figure from history. They'll say Gandhi, but they don't know anything about Gandhi. So I'm always encouraging them to do something like, I'd rather have you talk about LeBron James or Seth Curry, someone you actually know something about, than like something you learned in class like 2 years ago that you don't remember. So encouraging them to use this as a way to figure out where they really are experts, I think, is super helpful. This is just an example. So I will show this to the students. Again, depending on the mode of intervention that I'm delivering, this might be something I do on the spot with them. This might be something I just show them. I've been doing a lot more showing and just talking than interactive over Zoom. I think you guys understand how that goes. But these are different examples that I could use. And then I'll say to them, I'm like, well, I would probably talk about current events. Like I follow the news pretty closely. I know that I put Hunger Games for popular culture, and I do think it would probably be a good example, but honestly, I don't remember that much about the book or the movie, because it was a long time ago. So I probably wouldn't actually choose to write about that. Even if I had that idea, when I'm really honest with myself, I don't think I could really do that much with that idea. So not every idea we have needs to be developed into a body paragraph. And I sort of have that conversation with them using a lot of think aloud. And of course, another way to do this would be to have them do it. Okay, that would be a great thing to do. I'm doing it as a demonstration, but that would be a great thing to do. It is not just to make it your ideas, but see what they come up with. And then you could pick one of those ideas and then develop it into a body paragraph. And this is where I show them how it's not so difficult to get that 600 words, because this is just one paragraph and it's 220. And so in the interest of full disclosure, I first crafted this slideshow. I've been kind of fine-tuning it during the earliest days of the pandemic, when we were actually all at home and teaching from home during the 4th quarter of 2020. So you'll see in this example, spring and summer of 2020, that's what was in my mind at that time. And so what I talked about is, again, this goes back to what extent are we free to make our own choices? And I talked about how the pandemic affected some people to the extent where they didn't have a choice not to work. They had to go to work. They were essential workers. And so that's what this paragraph, I'm not going to read the whole paragraph because you're teachers and you can go back and look at this paragraph, but this would be something I might do. We might develop a body paragraph together. I might have the students do a body paragraph and share them out. Nothing that I'm suggesting here is super like, what? I know these are all very tried and true. And in fact, I'm sure that some of you are way more creative than I am. I always consider myself more of a meat and potatoes teacher, and I don't necessarily have a lot of the bells and whistles and tricks. But I just think by teaching them the easiest way through the test has always been the approach that I've liked to take. Then adding a conclusion. I think conclusions are always kind of the least important part. I think having something is better than nothing. I know even on the AP, you don't even get points for the conclusion. You can maybe get the sophistication point. But this is what I say to students about the conclusion. It's another chance to reemphasize the essay's focus. If the computer is looking for the purpose and focus, if they're scanning to look and see if it's sticking to the purpose, and you have a restatement in a couple places throughout the essay that's going to help that score, it gives you a chance to sum up your main ideas and to help, solidify that organization and structure. And so I give them a sample here. Again, a lot of these things, because of the pandemic and because I'm doing a lot of these things remotely, I have this stuff already done. If I were to do it more as an interactive experience with students, I'd probably write the introduction or the conclusion with them. I might have them try it. I'm often given just 3 hours to get through this whole task, and I find that it doesn't lend itself to a lot of interaction. But here's an example, ultimately, which is one of my favorite conclusion words. I like it better than in conclusion. Ultimately, we are not always free to make the decisions that we want to make. This is where you just put on one of those kind of generic conclusions. I kind of summed up my ideas. I leave the reader something to think about. In this case, I guess I leave the computer something to think about. So that's a conclusion that you can put on there. So then I just, at the end of an intervention, I'll go through and I'll talk about how those steps again, have a scrap sheet in front of you, determine your thesis, brainstorm the big ideas, find more specific examples, one idea per paragraph, draft your essay. So I will always go through and sort of sum up those steps for them at the end. So what makes a good essay? Another activity that's great to do with students is to have them look at sample essays. And I'm actually going to I actually teach a full-length TSI class, which is just like a class, but it's for TSI because they're really trying to crack down on the college readiness thing here at Jefferson. These are the two. This one's from 2008 and this one's from 2018. To my knowledge, they haven't put out one for the new test, but I don't believe the essay has changed in terms of what they're requiring. So Janet is actually looking into, Ms. Hester is actually looking into, is there a new guide? I haven't seen it if there is, but I think these older guides still are helpful. They're filled with samples. And the samples will be, I've printed out a couple. I don't want to navigate away from the slideshow, but you'll basically get like a sample essay and then you'll get an explanation. Actually, let me see if I can do that. Now that I'm saying I don't want to do it, I kind of want to do it. Hopefully you can see this. Oh yeah, it's Screencastify, it's not Zoom, you can see it. So let me show you this real quick. So you'll get everything from a 1, but I don't look at the 1s with the students. I look at the 4s and the 5s. There's only so much time I have, and there's no point showing them something that's really, really awful, I think. I think it's fine to show them something that has some issues, but so I go usually with the 4s and 5s because most of our students are falling at a 4, and we need them to be at a 5. We do have some coming in a 3, so, but what it does is it gives you the sample essay, and then it tells you why it got it. And this is the part that's really confounding to me, is notice this part's fine. They give each thing a score out of 2. I figured out through looking at an 8, which is the highest, that the highest that you'll give in a category is a 3. But what I find really confusing is, see, these are straight 2s. But if you look at the way they've scored the 5s, also straight 2s. Why, College Board, why must you do that? Couldn't one of these be like a 3? So I could say, oh, if they get 1 3, they'll get a 5. So I'm not 100% sure how they get to a 4 versus a 5. That's what I'm here to say. That is not a code I've cracked. I think it's purposely opaque. Honestly, I think it's to keep a shroud of, I think this is a test that they've enjoyed having a shroud of mystery around. And I think they changed it, frankly, because kids were starting to pass it, and they're like, we need to make it a little bit harder. That's sort of my cynical take on it, but that does not officially represent the views of the district, just so you know. To go back here, but that's what that looks like. And so that's a really good resource. An activity you could look at is show the kids a 4, show the kids a 5, show the kids a 6. And then you can say, well, what would you give this and why, and what are some of the problems with it, which is something I'm sure you do with STAR essays and with AP essays if those are the classes that you teach. So I looked and I went through, and that's why they printed them out, was I went through and I looked at the scores comments on the difference between a 4 and a 5, because we're getting a lot of 4s this year. And so obviously I need to get those up to 5s. So this is what the manual cites as the problems are with the 4. Inadequate examples, stringing together unrelated ideas, errors in punctuation, grammar, sentence structure, neglects to elaborate on examples, strays from the purpose of prompt, has difficulties progressing from one idea to the other. So basic writing things. So I think if they're at a 4, they're there with their focus probably, and they're pretty much there with their organization. It's just they're maybe having trouble transitioning between ideas, and maybe they're not giving enough development to their examples. So that's what I can tell. Again, this is just looking off what they say in the scorer's manual. I'm going to continue to work on this with my students, and I'm hoping in our June testing, I'm recording this in April, and we're going to be testing again in June. I'm hoping that I'll have time to build some of these in the students and directly address some of these. The punctuation, grammar, and sentence structure is a tricky one, because once they get to high school with a problem there, it is a little harder to fix it, but certainly not impossible. And certainly if we point it out to them and we let them know that it's something that they need to be aware of, and they can't just write anything they want, they should take the time to look over what they've written, that might be helpful. So that is the difference between a 4 and 5 according to the scoring manual. Oh, you don't have to do an exit ticket. That's left over from a student slideshow. So if you have any questions, email me. Don't drop a comment below. I don't know why I have that there. I never check my YouTube channel. I would be a terrible YouTuber. But I hope that was helpful. That's just a way that I go through an intervention with students. It's becoming harder because the test has become longer. So it's becoming harder to do all of that within the confines of the time. So that is something else I need to give some thought to. But I will also put this slideshow into the resources, into the Canvas course. You are welcome to then take it and make it your own, make a copy of it, like put your own spin on it. The only thing that I ask is that if you have a good idea, share it with me, because this is not something that I've cracked. This is something I've been asked to do this because I have a lot of experience. I've interacted with this test really, really often. And I had the reading test really well figured out, and then they went and changed it on me, which I'm sure you've had that happen many times over your teaching career. You're like, no, I know how they score these AP essays. I know how they score the STAR essays, and then they switch it up. So thank you very much. Please let me know if you have any questions, and have a wonderful day.